Tonight's journey is not just a story. It's a test of how long your mind can survive the Arctic night. Before we step into this frozen world, make sure to like the video, subscribe to Doe's Dynasty, and drop a comment so this adventure reaches more night travelers like you. Hi guys, tonight we step quietly into the frozen frontier where your breath lifts in pale ribbons in the horizon. Looks like it forgot to thaw. You stand at the edge of a settlement that has not yet earned the word town. A scattered cluster of rough cabins bent like stubborn shoulders against the wind. The cold bites fast. You feel it in your fingertips, in the back of your throat, in that thin place behind your eyes that always aches when winter digs in. Out here in the Wild West, winter is not a season. It is an opponent. And as you take your first step into this world, you already sense that you probably will not survive this. Without a few tricks the early settlers had to learn the hard way. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to help me drift a little deeper into the nighttime atmosphere, tell me your location and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights and follow me into the cold. You trudge across ground as stiff as hammered iron, feeling each footstep echo upward into your ankles. The settlement around you is barely more than a promise. A few cabins lean at awkward angles, their logs irregular and hastily shaped. Settlers often built fast in their first year, shaping shelter before shaping comfort. That is your world now, a place born of haste and hope and not much else. One mainstream fact you might already know is that most frontier cabins were built in a single frantic season. The goal simply to stand against storms long enough to get through the first winter. If the structure was still upright in spring, it was considered a triumph. You step closer to one of these cabins. The scent of fresh-cut pine lingers even through the cold. The logs are chinked with a mixture of mud, straw, moss, and whatever else could be scraped together. Everything looks temporary, but then again, so did most things out here. As you rest your hand on a log, you feel how imperfectly it fits the next with a narrow seam that will let in more wind than anyone wants to admit. Quirky as it sounds, some settlers stuffed bits of old clothing into those gaps, an improvised insulation that historians still puzzle over. Historians still argue whether this habit came from European folk practices or was simply born of desperation in the moment. You push open the rough door and feel a burst of stale warmth, the kind that smells faintly of smoke and boiled beans. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dim room. Inside, everything is arranged around a single objective: surviving the night. The hearth glows with a few tired coals, barely warm enough to take the edge off the freezing air. Someone sits by the fire, half asleep, yet determined not to let the embers go out. Maintaining heat was a communal duty here. If one person drifted off for too long, the entire household could wake to frost on their blankets and ice in their hair. You shrug deeper into your coat and let your eyes roam around the interior. There are no polished floors or finished walls. The ceiling beams are raw and uneven. The floor is packed earth that sends cold upward like an unwanted message. A few iron tools hang on nails hammered straight into the logs, trembling slightly whenever the wind slams against the outside walls. In one corner, piled like a miniature hill, is a mound of firewood. Settlers knew that gathering wood in winter was risky business, so they stacked it high before the first snow arrived. Running out could be deadly during a cold snap. The room teaches you, even before anyone says a word, that every item inside is part of the fight against the cold. A child sleeps on a narrow bunk filled with straw, wrapped in a quilt that looks handmade. You step closer and see the quilting stitches, uneven but careful. Tiny pieces of scrap fabric sewn together into warmth. Some patterns resemble ones you might still find in museum collections today. Your breath creates a thin fog as you exhale, showing just how cold the room still is. Even with a fire, most cabins remained frigid. People slept fully dressed, sometimes with their boots on. It sounds dramatic, but it was simply practical. Any exposed skin froze quickly. Someone calls you over to a spot near the hearth. You sit, warming your hands. The heat spreads slowly, seeping into your fingers with a kind of aching relief. The fire crackles weakly, and you can almost hear the cabin walls shift, reacting to the temperature. A quirky custom you may not have heard of involved singing soft songs while tending the fire at night, partly to stay awake and partly to chase away loneliness. Some settlers believed that fire listened and that a gentle voice kept it alive. Whether that was superstition or exhaustion talking, historians still debate, but the image feels fitting in this quiet room. You close your eyes for a moment and simply listen. The wind outside sounds like a living thing brushing its claws across the roof. Snow slides from branches and lands with soft thumps. Somewhere in the distance, something howls, maybe a wolf, maybe only the wind. You find yourself leaning closer to the fire without realizing it, seeking that fragile warmth. Your hosts show you the corner where you will sleep tonight. It is not a bed. Not in the way you imagine a bed. It is a narrow platform of wood topped with straw covered, with a heavy blanket made from rough fabric and bison hide. It smells smoky, earthy, and distinctly animal, a combination that settles oddly in your lungs, but signals real warmth. You run your hand along the hide, feeling the coarse fur that once belonged to a creature that roamed these plains. Long before cabins arrived, frontier settlers often relied on buffalo robes simply were not enough. According to some accounts, they were so warm that people woke sweating even in sub-zero nights, though that depended entirely on how the cabin was built and how fierce the weather turned. You lie down, testing the bedding. The straw underneath pokes a little, shifting with each movement. The blanket is heavy, almost too heavy, pressing against your chest in a comforting but slightly suffocating way. As you settle, you feel the cold seeping through the floor beneath you. Settlers sometimes laid down evergreen branches to add insulation under bedding, a trick borrowed from indigenous groups who knew the land long before newcomers arrived. Without such measures, the cold radiated upward all night, chilling even the toughest sleepers. The fire pops, sending a tiny spark across the hearth before it dies. Someone stirs the coals again, coaxing another faint glow to life. The room dips into dimness for a moment, then brightens slightly, and you lie there watching that glow dance along the walls, casting trembling shadows that almost look like figures moving in the corners. Tallow candles sit unlit nearby, saved for emergencies. Candles were precious, nights were long, and everyone feared running out. Your breath grows softer, slower. Your body feels heavy on the straw bed. The cold still wraps itself around you. But the buffalo hide pushes back, creating a bubble of warmth. In this small, imperfect cabin under a roof assembled in a rush, you experience the same mixture of fear, fatigue, and grit that defined the earliest winters in the Wild West. You drift, but the story continues. You wake before dawn, not because you slept well, but because the cabin walls groan like a living thing when the temperature drops. The sound nudges you out of a half-dream and into the frigid air, colder now that the fire has slumped into tired ash. You pull the buffalo hide closer, feeling its bulk trap, what little warmth your own body managed to generate. As the first weak gray light seeps through the gaps in the log walls, you already understand why most settlers built their cabins quickly and with almost frantic determination. The cold does not wait politely for anyone. You rise slowly, joints stiff from the straw mattress. Each movement makes the dry stalks beneath you shift and crackle. The floor feels as hard and cold as a stone cellar, and a light dusting of icy rime sparkles along the edges of the room. You watch your breath leave your mouth in short white puffs. This is your world now, a place where every morning is a reminder that survival is a full-time occupation. The structure around you looks rough from the inside, too, exactly as it did from the outside last night. Logs stacked quickly, notched together with just enough precision to hold. One mainstream historical fact is that many frontier settlers constructed these cabins in only a few days, relying on neighbors in a cooperative effort called a raising, where everyone worked fast before storms rolled in. You step toward the door, touching the cold iron latch, and feel how fragile the entire building suddenly seems. You can spot tiny fractures in the chinking where the wind pressed hardest overnight, and you imagine cold air swirling through while you slept, searching your blankets for weakness. Some cabins were so poorly sealed that families stuffed rags or dried grass into the cracks every night, trying to buy themselves a little extra warmth until they could make better repairs. A quirky little practice involved using cattail fluff mixed with mud for chinking, mostly because it was surprisingly insulating and easy to gather when the marshes had not, yet frozen solid. Historians still argue whether this was adopted from local tribes or simply invented through improvisation. When you push open the door, the morning slaps you with a fresh reminder of where you are. The cold is not merely cold. It is an entire presence, a thing that presses against your skin with a kind of stern warning. You step outside onto the snow-covered ground and hear it crunch beneath your boots. The cabin looks even rougher from this angle than it did last night. No paint, no ornament. Nothing but raw wood peeled from trees only weeks or months before. Smoke rises in a thin line from a few chimneys nearby, too faint to suggest much warmth inside. As you walk a short circle around the cabin, you notice how the logs shrink slightly in winter, creating new gaps. The settlers could not wait for the wood to dry before building, so it shrank in place, creating problems they had to solve as they went. Your fingers brush over one seam and you feel the wind push through as if the cabin were trying to whisper back at you. The cold here is a persistent tutor reminding you that this settlement is still young, still vulnerable, still fighting to earn a place on the map. You duck back inside and close the door quickly. The interior feels slightly warmer, only because the outside was so brutally sharp. Someone is already crouched at the hearth, coaxing flames back to life with a few shavings of kindling. The smell of smoke thickens the air in a comforting way. Watching them, you understand why surviving winter required constant attention. Let the fire die completely, and you spend the next hour or more battling frozen fingers to relight it. Through the haze, you hear a soft rustle from the sleeping platform across the room. Another family member stirs, wrapped entirely in blankets like a cocoon, their breath fogging the air above them. Cabins like this often housed large families in small spaces. Privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Everyone slept in the same room, ate in the same room, worked in the same room, and tried not to get on each other's nerves. But winter had a way of amplifying every discomfort. The darkness lasted long. The wind pressed in from every direction and the constant threat of illness loomed. You find yourself imagining how many nights settlers spent listening to a child cough or a parent shiver, wondering whether the home would hold. Someone offers you a tin cup of warm water heated near the fire. The metal is dented, probably shaped by hand from available scraps. You hold it close and watch the steam curl upward. It smells faintly of iron and wood smoke. You sip and feel that first thin thread of warmth slide down your throat. In the corner, you notice tools arranged neatly: an axe, a saw, a mallet, and a few nails hammered into the logs for hanging storage. You also see a small bundle of green pine boughs resting near the straw mattress. Settlers sometimes used pine needles to freshen bedding or scatter across the floor for insulation. A strange yet charming tidbit is that some families believed that pine boughs kept out evil spirits during the long nights. Historians still wonder whether this belief came from European folklore or was shaped by local customs absorbed. During the expansion westward, you glance upward at the roof beams. They are thick but not evenly sized. You can tell they were felled and shaped quickly. The roof overhead is layered with simple shingles or even bark. Snow weighs heavily on it, and you hear an occasional groan as the timber shifts. On especially stormy nights, settlers feared collapse, and it was common to wake every hour to brush snow off or check for leaks. You imagine yourself lying awake, listening for the first sign of cracking wood, the way someone might listen for thunder before a storm. Breakfast is simple, if breakfast can even be called that. Last night's beans warmed in the same pot that cooked dinner. A piece of cornbread dried beyond softness. Hunger was a regular visitor in winter, and food had to stretch. You eat while standing near the fire, letting its fragile heat soak into your legs. Outside, the settlement begins to stir. Doors open. People step out. Their movements are slow, tired but determined. You see a neighbor carry a bucket of water that is already forming ice on its rim. Another leads a horse from a small shed, breath misting heavily in the cold. It strikes you how much life continued even when the weather seemed intent on stopping everything. The Wild West demanded effort at all hours. You step back inside and close the door, realizing that the cabin, rough as it is, still represents safety. Last night it stood between you and the unforgiving elements. Tonight it will do the same. And as the fire brightens and spreads its warmth into the room, shadows soften and tension loosens from your shoulders. You begin to understand the settlers more deeply. Their cabins were not perfect. They were not comfortable, but they were hope carved into wood. Still dispute whether this practice was widely adopted or just a regional trick. But the idea of a frontier homemaker trying everything to make life a bit easier seems entirely believable. As you stand there inhaling the scents of wood and dirt, you straighten, listening for the sounds outside. Wind pushes through the cracks again. Even in daylight, the cabin walls pop lightly as though reacting to each gust. Inside, despite the fire, your breath still fogs. You notice the thin shimmer of frost crawling along the lower edges of the walls, forming faint patterns like ghostly lace. Sleeping in a place like this meant accepting that you would never truly escape the cold. You only learn to fight it. You reach out and place your palm against the interior log wall. It feels colder than stone. The wood is not finished or sanded. It is rough, uneven, and splintered in places. Settlers often rushed construction before winter fully closed in. Logs were shaped with axes and adzes, not planed smooth. You imagine the builders working late into the evening, hands blistered, breath steaming, racing against the season. The result is exactly what you see around you, a cabin that stands. But not comfortably, not confidently. The walls hold back the wind, but only just. Your fingers trace one of the seams between the logs, and you sense how fragile the insulation really is. Mud and straw stuffed into the gaps crack easily in freezing weather. Sometimes chunks fall out overnight. Families kept baskets of patching material nearby, ready to rest holes whenever light streamed through where it should not. You picture a tired settler waking in the dark, pressing handfuls of moss or old cloth into the opening while cold air nips at their knuckles. Survival was not a grand heroic act. It was this constant maintenance done quietly and repeatedly. You wander toward the corner where you slept last night and sit down, sinking slightly into the straw. It rustles under you, a dry whispering sound. Your blanket still smells like smoke, and the bison hide still carries the faint scent of the animal it once belonged to. You shift, trying to find a comfortable spot, and feel a sharp stalk poke your shoulder. Straw bedding was notorious for this. Settlers often discovered twigs, burrs, or even the occasional beetle mixed into their mattresses. A fringe bit of law says some people added dried herbs like mint or lavender to mask the odor and discourage pests.